Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, welcome back to it. Phenomenal job today in class. Mainly shout out my C and D period. G period, I haven't seen you yet, but I know you're going to do great too. But the big thing about it, though, is we are now diving headfirst into another section of our exploration unit where we're now basically talking about the rise of colonies in this newly discovered territories in both, in both North and South America as the Europeans begin to show up and settle these different places coming from their areas of Europe right here. And see how cute this Prezi is? Like, look, I got little lines about these people going this way and then these people going this way. And so it's very, very important that you understand the rise of colonial systems. What happens to the natives when these colonies begin to rise up? What happens and why are certain things that we've learned in other history classes when we were in middle school, why were they occurring? Things like that. For example, Ava Kirsch wrote down in her notes a question that she had for me during a flip and that she showed to me when we talked about it. Like, if you have questions like that, do that. Be like Ava Kirsch and actually write these things down because it's an awesome way to actually be able to learn and understand the whys and the hows to everything we discuss in this class. But diving straight forward into it, we're talking about the rise of colonies. Now, we talked about this in a warm-up recently. A colony is a word that we don't really need to write down the definition for because you know what it is. It's just kind of hard to explain. But basically what it is, it's a settlement of a foreign country in a different area. And that settlement is basically there for economic or political gain. And then we also started talking about the big motivators, right? We started talking about the big motivators behind it. Those three big words that motivated the Europeans to go out and explore these different areas, the Spanish especially, known as gold, God, and glory, right? And we actually found out apparently in B period that Taylor Mateu's third grade teacher, Miss Grab, was teaching this college level idea to third graders, right? Which kind of just shows you how much you possibly can learn, right? Literally because Taylor shot up in class like, God, gold, glory! And she just knew it without a shadow of a doubt, right? We knew that the Europeans going into that whole thing. C period did a great job too. Also, again, quick shout out C period. Amazing questions as always. And then F period, great conversation today. Keeping engaged with it, right? And Perry was asking a lot of questions. Dakota Cope, was sitting there like she always does. So now the big thing about it though in general also is big shout outs to all of y'all that starting off the year this hot and also going into this unit, which is a little drier than some of the other ones that we've talked about, right? But that gold, God, glory concept is very, very important. And I believe we stopped in all of our classes right around this gold aspect, right? Controlling trade, right? We started discussing the ideas of controlling trade and how Spanish and European explorers are going to begin to set up colonies so they can control the trade, right? Now, the trade specifically that the Spanish were worried about early on was the mining of gold and silver and how they're going to use their advanced tools that are made out of iron and steel and bronze and stuff like that to be able to dig further than the natives ever had, accessing plentiful veins and amounts of gold and silver that are underground in these mine shafts and stuff like that. Now, the other interesting aspect of it is that it wasn't the Spanish going down there. Bella Arnold, when she was leaving today, was like, why can't we all just get along? And I know, right, Bella? I know. Shout out Bella Arnold, right? That is so true. Why can't we just, why didn't the Spanish, if you wanted that gold so bad, just go down there yourselves? But no. They sent the natives down there instead. The surviving natives that did not die from smallpox, malnourishment, war, destruction, genocide, any of those violent actions from the Spanish in this entire period leading up to this, had to work in these mines, mining gold and silver, right? And these mines had terrible, terrible conditions. Conditions that include no ventilation, conditions that include no protective equipment, conditions that include possible explosion if you hit a gas vein or certain other things, or another big one, mine collapse, right? These mines are not like ones that you see in the Americas now that are reinforced with wood siding and reinforced on the edges to make sure that the actual mine does not collapse in on itself. These are primitive mines and simple mines that are just dug deep down into the earth that were prone to collapse at any minute. And again, the Spanish would not go down there themselves. They were forcing natives to go down there, right? And we'll talk again, like I said, about the system that actually pushed them to do this. Now, continuing with this controlling trade as well, this gold motivation, this big overarching idea that we use to basically just describe the Spanish using the natives and using native land and native resources to make excessive amounts of money. To keep going forward as well, you also have to talk about agricultural stuff that is going to be actually drawn out of these different colonial areas. If you can't hear me right now, it's because I don't want my computer to die, and I'm trying to plug this bad boy up really quick, okay? So going into it, though, or trying to understand it, there are things that grow in these areas naturally as well that the Spanish want to try and use to make some money. So the colonies are going to also ship not only gold and silver back to their mother countries, particularly Spain, but Spain also wants to use raw materials that can be grown in these areas, right? Examples of raw materials include foodstuffs, new vegetables and things discovered in North and South America. Cotton, we're going to use that as an example. And it's the only reason I have that word on there, but it's pretty irrelevant. And I'll talk about why here in a second. But then another big one, sugarcane, right? So now what a raw material is, notice I have raw materials right here in all capital letters for a reason. What a raw material is any good that is grown and has not been processed. So it's in its natural state. And so I made this little like picture thing to try and explain what raw materials are and explain what's going on and how the Europeans are going to use this to make an excessive amount of money. So let's use cotton, right? Let's use the example of cotton. Now, the thing about it is cotton is grown on a plant that looks like this, right? That is where cotton comes from. And at this time, most of the world's cotton was actually being grown in India. And again, I'll get to this whole contradiction or whatever, but I'm trying to use this plant as an example of how this raw material conversion happens. So that right there is cotton in its natural form. It blooms out of these little buds and it creates these little like things that you have to pull off, and you got to take the seeds of it out. And then you can actually string that into thread and weave it, spin it into thread, and then you can weave it into a finished product. So this is the processed good that is made out of cotton, like a cotton shirt, right? That is processed. This is a raw material. It's in its natural state. So the Spanish want to actually harvest raw materials from the colonies, bring them back to Europe, give them to artisans, guilds, or small factory owners, and have them make them into processed goods, right? So now the reason why I keep saying don't worry about cotton, don't like kind of store that in your mind, is because that is not what the Spanish were growing. And typically speaking, whenever you've been in an American education system, the only thing you ever hear about cotton is like the growing of cotton in North and South, or in North America, particularly in the lower 48 states, especially in the agrarian South. But that doesn't start up until the 1700s. What was actually being grown more than anything else in North America and South America during this time was sugarcane, right? Sugarcane grew so well in the Caribbean that they literally called the Caribbean islands the Sugar Islands, right? So sugarcane was the most profitable crop that could be grown in Central and South America. Now looking at it, it's because of what it can be made into, right? Sugarcane is a very, very easy product to make into multiple other things. Sugarcane can be made into sugar, molasses, and rum, right? Now, ironically enough, you need molasses to make sugar. The first two items are, well, molasses is the key thing. You make molasses out of sugarcane. And molasses is this thick, brown, gooey substance that you get from actually milking the sugarcane and then boiling that down, right? And you can then actually crystallize it and make sugar, or you can ferment it and make rum, right? And rum, of course, being the alcoholic drink that pirates always talk about, right? So now, but just like the mines, sugar requires a very large workforce, okay? And the original people working on these things, on these farms, on these plantations, and in these areas are, the natives, right? So, like, it's very, very important to understand who's working in these areas and who is being forced to do this, right? So looking at this right here, that is sugarcane, right? That is what sugarcane looks like in its raw form. It grows like a stalk very, very easily in certain warm and very, very like tropical slash like climactic areas. Now looking at it though, it requires a huge workforce to harvest it, grow it, and then like literally process it, right? So what this is, as you can see, these are all natives. Natives holding the sugar cane, natives cooking the sugar cane down into molasses and putting it into different jugs. And so who and how did the Spanish force the natives to actually do all this work? Well, they did it by enforcing this system, a system known as the Encomienda, right? Encomienda is a system of forced labor that the Spanish were forcing onto the natives and making them actually do the work for them, right? So the Encomienda is a system of forced labor that gave colonists the right to force the natives to work by law, right? And why do I have the word refusal question mark on there? It's because theoretically what would happen if natives refused to do this? Well, they could literally be arrested, mutilated, sometimes having like parts of their body like cut off, actually being physically punished, or having their family taken hostage, right? So as you can see, this is a very, very violent, very aggressive system. And this little thing right here that you don't need to write down, because if you understand it, you don't need to write it down. Notice what I said, you don't need to write this little thing down. But the plan for the Encomienda was that Spanish would be like, oh, well, we're gonna settle there, protect, care for, and Christianize the natives, and the natives will only work a part of their day in exchange for us helping them. But in reality, what was actually happening is that Spanish settlers forced long labor, didn't pay the Native American workers, failed to protect them, and seized their land when they would die, right? And natives died from diseases and harsh living and working conditions, right? So the Encomienda finally ended after the Catholic Church protested this, and also after several Native American results, right? Now, of course, this is going to continue, but the big thing about it, though, is that the natives worked mainly in two locations during this forced enslavement, right? And they were working mainly in the mines and on sugarcane plantations. Now, the one that was more dangerous to work in were the mines. The mines would kill thousands of natives through poor conditions, no ventilation, exhaustion, collapse, and things like that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And also, the mines were especially used for children. Like, children were heavily used to actually work. Native children were heavily used to work in the mines in these areas because they were very small and actually could get into small holes and drag large carts or open ventilation windows to try and vent out dangerous gas in these mines. So as you can see, the Encomienda system is absolutely horrid and actually led to the death of thousands of people. And this right here is a Spanish settler, as you can see, holding a whip, forcing Native Americans to plant sugarcane. So as you can see, like I said, it's a very, very messed up system. And the Encomienda is going to, along with contact from disease, is going to kill as many of 90% of some pre-Columbian native societies. The Taino, over 90% of them end up dead because of the Encomienda system and the spread of dangerous disease, right? Because of these two things, that means that the Spanish are now literally doing, like running out of their labor force, which is one of the most horrible things to even utter. It's like, oh, darn it, we're running out of our labor force. How about you should have just left them alone in the first place, right? So the big thing about it, though, is that this is causing the Europeans, though, to then replace the natives with African slaves. So that right there is the key moment when the Encomienda system begins to die off because the natives are actually suffering from what is could be considered a genocide. They are dying off, and then the Europeans are going to replace those natives who are perishing with slaves from Africa, right? And that's going to turn North America, South America, Central America into what you would consider a slave society, right? And we will discuss that a little bit more as we get further into this unit. So keeping going, though, colonial society and culture is also going to boom during this time period, okay? The big thing you need to understand is that Europeans are going to place large colonies on this newly conquered land. You're going to see the growth of some places like so in Puerto Rico, for example, there's a very, very large city that started out as a Spanish colony. And Puerto Rico actually is literally named as a Spanish colony. Puerto Rico meaning rich port, right? Or a rich port city, okay? So Havana is going to be a massive place in Cuba that is going to be an early Spanish colony. You're going to see other places as well, like Mexico City, DF, and other areas throughout all of South America that are going to be these newly established colonies that the Spanish are going to use to make an aggressive amount of money off these raw materials and off these mined metals. Now, an interesting little part about this, though, is that the Spanish also passed laws on those colonists saying that they could only trade with Spain. So this is what's called an embargo, right? So basically what I mean by this word embargo is the Spanish are saying to their colonists, you may only trade or buy items that are coming to and from Spain, okay? And then also this is going to lead to a massive amount of smuggling as well. And smuggling, and what that is, means that people are going to secretly buy and sell goods from other people like the British or the French or the Dutch and stuff like that. So there's an interesting little component going on here that the gold that's being mined from a lot of these Spanish mines is ending up in the hands of other Europeans because they're actually paying it out. Now we'll talk about this other big thing called mercantilism and this little stuff a little bit later on, but what you need to know right now is that all these mother countries were like, you may only buy your goods from us, and that's what's known as a trade embargo. And as you can see, the colonies are beginning to grow. They included government buildings, churches, large homes, and things like that by the announcements or whatever. But getting back into it, those embargoes, those smuggling things are very, very important. However, as you can see with these growing Spanish colonies, including big government buildings, very, very large transport systems that are actually moving these raw materials in and out, it's going to lead also to very close interactions between Europeans that were coming and colonizing these areas natives and the Africans that are being brought in on these different like slave vessels. So in Spanish settlements, though, in particular, notice I have the word Spanish right there in all caps. You also have to understand that this causes a large amount of new social classes and racial mixing. So something that you need to understand is that most of the Spanish colonists were men, right? Single men that were going to these colonies as a way to make money. They were getting there, and then they were meeting native women, African women, and things like that. And so that's going to lead to the establishment of new social classes to try and include these new people of mixed race. So, for example, Latin American people to this day are the youngest race of people that has ever existed because they actually are originally connected to this group right here known as mestizo, right? And mestizo is when there would be a Spanish man and a native woman, and they would have a child. That child would be considered mestizo because they had European blood. And then you had this word as well, mulatto, which is not a word that we use in common society. Do not walk around and just say this word. It's very rude and offensive. But it is actually when there would be a Spanish man and an African woman, and they would actually have a child together, and that person would be known as this new class, known as a mulatto. So these are really important to know because as we begin to progress forward, you're going to need to understand that the Spanish colonial system is growing and they're adding a lot of new social classes to the Spanish colonial system, which later on is going to become very, very hard to keep track of, and it's also going to lead to these things called the Latin American independence movements. So do me a favor and highlight these two groups of people and make sure you know that that is like literally the different races that mix together to make these people and what they actually mean. And also it's very, very important to highlight this single Spanish men thing because it makes a lot of sense and it kind of helps you understand the progressive history going forward. So getting into it though a little bit as well is now we're going to leave South America behind and we're going to allow the Spanish like conquistadors and the Spanish settlers to continue to grow these colonies, and we're going to let that kind of cook up and we're going to bring it back and talk about it, how the like actual Spanish government dealt with this entire system a little bit later on. But now what we're going to be getting into is this last little thing that we're going to be talking about going into our next class, which is the struggles for North America, right? So now the big thing about it is like notice what we said when we looked at that original map with the Spanish colonies. There's a lot of North America in the middle, but there was a large part of it still left unclaimed, right? So when we actually looked at this map originally. There it is. So the Spanish are going to actually start in this area and expand south and then north. But what's up with all this gray right here that was never claimed by the Spanish? Well, who gets dibs on that, or who tried to colonize that first? Because while the Spanish and the Portuguese settled in Central and South America, particularly the Portuguese being in Brazil, they might have settled there, but other Europeans had eyes on North America, particularly the east coast of the North America, as well as what is now modern-day Canada. So that is a really big question of who are going to be the two countries that claim vast amounts of territory in that area. Let's take a minute to see if you can guess.
The final Jeopardy category today is 3 named women. Let's take a look at the clue.
Well, for either of you three that I put on there, or for any of you people that said British and French, you are correct. The English and the French are going to be the two that try to go in and colonize most of North America. Now, the French are going to show up and basically attempt to build what you could refer to as a new France. And we are going to start right there when I see you again in class. But I'll see y'all then. Y'all have a good one.